Happy Monday, as always, and happy August. The thing that I was wondering about, it's not just today, but it's an all the time thing, is really what's the proper balance of rest and work. This is just an interesting topic that I've thought about for a long time, and there probably isn't an actual answer, would be my guess. It's subjective. The reason this has been on my mind more the last couple of years is since owning a business, there's always an element of more that can be done. Um, Even if you hit a point where everything that needs done is done, there's a question of growth. So some people do grow their business to a point of sustaining it, and they really don't have to do a lot. And they've got a good team with them, and they kind of do some of the main things that need done. But for the most part, it runs. And I think that can be great. But I think for a lot of people, they want to keep building. And even if you're not at that phase yet, there's this question of work that needs done. And when you rest and when you relax. And there's this idea that I like um, about when you get advice from people, they will often give you advice about where they are now, not necessarily their route towards it. And so, where this shows up with work life balance is a lot of people who run successful businesses or who are very wealthy will tell you, oh, it's important to have a morning routine, an evening routine, make time for this, make time for that. But then when you look at what they actually did to become successful, it's not that at all. A lot of them work this life that gets them close to burning themselves out completely just to get there. And it's not really functional, but they've now gotten to the place where they can afford that extra time. And so the real question is, what does it take to do the job up front or where you're at right now? Which is why, it is helpful to take advice from people way ahead of you in whatever you're looking at. But we want to make sure when we receive advice or when we're giving advice that it's appropriate to the level that the question's being asked. So if someone's talking to, if I'm talking to someone who runs a $10 million a year business, they can't give me an answer for a $10 million a year business because my business isn't that. They would have to give me an answer that connects more to where I'm at with my business's revenue. And I think that can be hard because you also have to remember where you were at in that moment. And I bring all that up because work-life balance is an interesting thing. And for my friends who are business owners, that's a very prominent question. And the question for me is always, when do you work late versus be strict with your hours? And should you have a set amount of hours that you're trying to work, or do you just work until the job is done? And I think there are benefits to all of them. I think a lot of people listening will say, you do what it takes. And I think that's appropriate. So part of the question is what it takes more than what you should be doing? So let's say it for me, where my business is currently at, to get everything up to a place that it's good or comfortable, it would take me 85 hours a week of work for the next 10 months. There's no way to fully know that, but you could wonder about it and you could ask about it and see what happens. And I think that question can be fair. And then you have to decide, is that worth the payoff? And I think that's really the question. And one of the pieces for proper rest, I think, is kind of two-sided in terms of two categories. And one is being very careful about what you're stepping into and what you're saying yes to in life. Is this really the right decision to make? And once you say yes, following through on that. And some things it's easier to back out of than others. Recently getting this office space with a couple rooms, you have to sign a lease for that. No, I have to. And you're locked in, and there's always maybe ways to wiggle out if you need to, but it's not a decision that 2 months in I can decide this wasn't a good idea and run from it. However, putting a lot of effort into a marketing plan and it doesn't work very well and then you pull out, that's, you might lose some money, but you can leave, you can exit that. So certain things are easier to exit than others when it comes to commitment. And that's not true of just work. It's true of life in general. Committing to lead a class, for instance, is very different than committing to just a casual park hangout with 20 friends. One of them is much more appropriate to back out of than the other if needed. So I think that's kind of side one, is what are you saying yes to? What are you agreeing to in your life? And what are you saying, yeah, this is something I'm going to do. And I know it might take a lot, and then overestimating, even, because you don't want to underestimate. I'd rather look at a project and say this will take 20 hours and then it only takes 15 than to say it'll take 10 and then it takes 15. So overestimating the commitment needed, and you'll never know that perfectly, but my personal rule of thumb is overestimate by at least 20%, and you'll usually fall within a comfort zone, and you'll, if you pay attention, you'll start to learn yourself better and what to really expect with your output. The other side is life situations. So, what if you have a really chronic illness and you have to sleep or do some sort of personal recovery work, like 12 hours a day, and like sleep plus, the stretches and therapies. And then you have to have a full-time job to pay for that and to take care of things. And maybe you got a couple kids, and maybe your partner left and you have just the kids and you don't have support. And well, you don't really get the opportunity to rest, do you? And so then we get into this question of ideal versus realistic. That person's ability to rest, well, it doesn't really matter what they're saying yes or no to. There's certain things that they can't say no to. And I say you can't, but I'm going to confidently say it's wrong for you to abandon your kids. So that's off the table. In terms of taking care of personal health, yeah, you get a little bit into that, what's right and wrong. And so I use an example of someone who maybe has chronic fatigue and they have medical issues that require attention. When do you just say, oh, I'm just going to power through that? Well, some people would argue the more you power through, the less your output is. If you're operating on 5 hours of sleep and your body is designed for 9, and you have other chronic pains that you're not addressing, are you really getting that full day's work, or would you be more productive? That's the question of, working 8 hours well slept and well fed versus working 10 hours underfed and like you're eating like garbage and you aren't sleeping well. Which one's going to be more productive? And a lot of people would say the 8-hour person is going to be more productive because they're just going to have the energy for it and they're going to get further. So for a lot of people, that's another piece, is the output. I think I've talked about him a couple times on here, but Alex Hormozy is a pretty successful business guy, and he puts out some pretty good, what would I say? Just thoughts from time to time that are good. And one of them that I find interesting for him, and just from him, which is food for thought, is his definition of burnout is something along the lines of output per minute dropping. So, if I'm feeling tired and exhausted, but my output of the work I'm doing is not dipping at all, then I'm not really burnt out. It's more my brain being like, I don't want to. You can think about the same in the gym. If you're overstimulated or you're overtraining, which, people have their opinions on, but you can tell if you do like 4 sets of bench press, if you're getting weaker and weaker by the set, then your return for time put in is going down. And eventually that's not going to be helpful anymore. So you hit a pause point where you're like, yeah, I need to rest and recover. Same with work. I need to rest, or at least transition. I can do a whole day of work. I can do 10, 12 hours at my office and then still have energy to come home and play guitar for like a half hour or an hour. It's completely different experience for me to do, and I can practice that regardless of how long I've worked. The only exception is if I'm physically tired, but usually my work makes me mentally exhausted. And so I actually often have room for physical. I don't respond amazingly to late night workouts. It'll keep me up a little bit later. But physical activity after work is definitely on the table for me. I can do anything physical most days because most of my work is mental. And if you're someone who works construction, or you're a general contractor, or you're building, or you're outside all day, and you come home, you might have a lot of mental energy left, but not a lot of physical. And so, rest has to go alongside the activity that you're resting from. So it's not an all-encompassing word. Just like work isn't all-encompassing. Work is different depending on what you're doing and depending on the day. So my job is mostly mental, but I would still consider it work if I help a friend move in the middle of summer. It's not paid labor, but it's physically working. And of great. That's fine. But it is very different than, as a therapist, what I do, which is often a lot more sitting than I would like actually in a career. So, um, yeah, it's that question of, most people will agree that your to-do list will never get done. So the question is, what really has to get done? When do you rest? When do you pause? A lot of people just, I think, have to find their own philosophy for this, is what I'm learning. And it is really hard because a lot of the people you hear from are like millionaires or billionaires or really successful people, or centimillionaires, a lot of them. And they give you their input, which just, it's helpful, but it's not always the proper framing. I think the most helpful people to get that framing from are people who make less than like personal income. So, some businesses are high revenue, but the overhead's a lot. Um, so they don't, their business might do 1 million in sales, but they make 50,000 a year because they have to buy all the supplies and parts and employees and stuff. So for personal take home, I like to hear a lot of what people, making less than $200,000 a year are dealing with, because that's more relatable. These are people who are not in the 1%, and they can be successful. 200,000 is a lot, but that includes people who make less than that too, where that's a little bit more within my realm of understanding and what work-life balance looks like at that level. And so uh, it's just an infinite question. And so I'm in a phase right now of prioritizing more sleep than normal, where I'm just sleeping in, and missing some of potential work in the morning, which is fine because most of my paid labor starts later in the day, and most of my administrative and building the business stuff happens in the mornings. So I'm losing some of that to catch up on sleep. And that's always a balance of like, well, where's the line really? And when you rest, how should you rest? And is it actually restful to watch TV, or should rest be a nap, or, taking a longer shower, reading a book? And you can get in your head about it. And I'm sure, anyone listening, I'm happy to hear. I'd love to hear your thoughts on work-life balance and rest, because I'm not sure that work-life balance is a real thing. I think it's seasonal. And you make sense of it how you can, week to week, month to month, year to year, and phase of life. So I would personally love to hear how other people are finding their own success or lack thereof with rest and life. So that's my reflection, a constant reflection. And I just wanted to bring some of that in here today. So that's my thoughts this week. And as always, I appreciate the views, subscribers, likes, those of you who choose to reach out from time to time. It's fun. So outside of that, I will just look forward to seeing everyone next Monday. See ya.